Welcome back, everyone. What you are about to hear is one of the most reckless military decisions in recent American history, and the country that suffered the most was not even the intended target. Trump sent a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier to the waters near Jamaica with the sole purpose of threatening Cuba. But Cuba did not back down. Instead, Cuba hit back so hard and so precisely that Jamaica, a completely innocent nation, ended up devastated in the crossfire. Today, we are breaking this entire situation down. The history behind it, why Trump made this call, what Cuba actually did, why Jamaica paid the price, and what this means for the world going forward. Stay until the end, because the analysis at the close is something mainstream media is completely ignoring. Let's get into it. To understand why this happened, we need to go back a little. Cuba has been a target of American hostility since 1959, the year Fidel Castro took power and removed U.S. corporate interests from the island. Since then, America has tried to isolate and economically strangle Cuba through some of the harshest sanctions ever imposed on any nation. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 brought the world within hours of nuclear war. That hostility never fully went away. When Trump came into power, he reversed every diplomatic step that Obama had made toward Havana. He retightened sanctions, put Cuba back on the state sponsors of terrorism list, and launched what analysts called a maximum pressure campaign, the same playbook used against Iran and Venezuela. The goal was to squeeze Cuba's economy until the government either collapsed or surrendered. Cuba did neither. So Washington decided to turn up the military heat. This is where geography becomes everything. Cuba sits just 90 miles from the Florida coast. Jamaica sits roughly 90 miles south of Cuba. Strategically, Jamaica is one of the most important islands in the entire Caribbean. It sits along major shipping lanes, close to the Panama Canal route, and most critically, it can serve as a forward staging area for any military operation aimed at Cuba. Washington knew this. The Pentagon knew this. And Cuba absolutely knew this. When signals emerged that America was planning to use Jamaica's proximity for military pressure operations, Cuba issued firm warnings through back-channel diplomatic contacts. Do not use our Caribbean neighbors against us. There will be consequences. Those warnings were dismissed. That was the first and most expensive mistake. The deployment of a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier strike group to the Jamaica-Cuba corridor was described publicly as a routine freedom of navigation exercise. But a carrier strike group is anything but routine. It consists of one nuclear-powered carrier with up to 90 warplanes, 2 guided missile cruisers, 2 destroyers, an attack submarine moving silently below the surface, and a supply ship. When this group moves into a region, every radar picks it up and every government scrambles to read the message. This was a direct military signal to Havana. We are at your doorstep. We can hit you at any time, fall in line, or face the consequences. The strike group positioned itself in international waters roughly 60 nautical miles off Cuba's western coastline, sitting inside the corridor between Jamaica and Cuba. U.S. aircraft ran patrol routes close to Cuban airspace. Intelligence submarines tracked Cuban military movements around the clock. Cuba went to full military alert within 48 hours. Russian-supplied S-300 air defense systems came fully online. Cuban naval vessels moved into defensive positions. Strategic missile units were placed on standby. The message from Washington had been received. But the response it triggered was nothing like what the Trump administration had planned for. Cuba did not fire on the U.S. aircraft carrier. That would have been a direct act of war against the most powerful navy on the planet. Cuba was far smarter than that. Cuban military intelligence had already mapped exactly how the American operation was being supported. The U.S. carrier group was using Jamaica's Port Royal Naval Facility for logistical resupply. American military cargo aircraft had been landing at Kingston's Norman Manley International Airport. U.S. surveillance drones were being flown from Jamaican territory. Jamaica had quietly become an active support base for the American pressure campaign, whether or not Jamaica's own civilian government fully understood what was happening on its soil. Cuba made a precise and calculated decision: destroy the forward support infrastructure rather than confront the carrier head-on. Using cruise missiles, electronic warfare that knocked out Jamaican coastal radar, and fast naval vessels in coordinated strikes, Cuba moved quickly. Kingston's port facilities were hit first, fuel depots destroyed, loading infrastructure disabled, the supply chain for American military ships severed. The airfield at Vernam Field, used for U.S. drone operations, was reduced to rubble. 3 coastal radar stations along Jamaica's south coast were destroyed.